My husband forgot my birthday but remembered his female best friends. I was only 18 when my life took a turn I hadn't expected. I met James during our freshman year in college. And it wasn't long before we fell in love. Young, naive, and deeply infatuated, we made plans for the future, but fate had other ideas. When I found out I was pregnant, our world shifted. It wasn't the ideal start, but James and I faced it together, determined to build a life for ourselves and the baby we were bringing into the world. The early years of our marriage were anything but easy. We juggled college, part-time jobs, and the endless demands of raising a child. There were nights of sleepless worry over bills and mornings where we handed off parenting duties like a baton as we rushed to class or work. Yet, amidst the chaos, we found joy in our little family, a sense of pride in how we weathered storms together. James was my partner in every way that mattered, steadfast, loving, and supportive. Or so I thought. From the beginning, there was another presence in our lives, Lily. James's childhood best friend was a fixture in his world long before I came along. And she made sure I knew it. I met James on a night they were out together, laughing and sharing stories as if they were the only two people in the room. Even our first kiss was interrupted by Lily, drunk and needing James's attention. Her presence wasn't just frequent, it was invasive, woven into every milestone of our relationship. When we married, Lily stood by James's side, dazzling in a gown that turned more heads than mine. While guests toasted our happiness, Lily wept openly, her tears stealing attention from the celebration. "She's just emotional," James had assured me, but the memory lingered, a shadow on what should have been our perfect day. Lily wasn't just a friend, she was an unspoken part of our family. She became the godmother to our son. A decision I reluctantly agreed to. James saw it as honoring their bond, but to me, it felt like yet another way she carved space into our lives. I told myself to be grateful, Lily wasn't malicious. After all, she was just always there. But as the years passed, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that my marriage was a triangle when it should have been a partnership. I often look back on the milestones of my life with James and wonder how they would have felt without Lily's constant presence. From the very beginning, she was there, her existence entwined with ours like an uninvited thread in a tapestry. It was a thread that pulled at me, unraveling moments that should have belonged solely to us. The first time I met James, he wasn't alone. He and Lily were at a concert, laughing and swaying to the music as though the rest of the world didn't exist. I was drawn to him immediately, his warm smile and easy charm disarming me. But even then, I noticed how Lily leaned into him, how her laughter lingered a bit too long. Still, I told myself it was harmless. They were childhood friends. Practically siblings, he said. I ignored the unease simmering beneath my fascination with him. Our first kiss should have been magical, the kind of memory you replay in your mind with a smile. We'd planned a romantic evening together, a quiet dinner followed by a walk under the stars. Everything was perfect until Lily called. She was at a bar, drunk and alone, and needed James to pick her up. The evening ended with him consoling her while I sat awkwardly on the sidelines, feeling like a guest in my own romance. "She's like family," he explained, as though that made her intrusion less invasive. When we got married, I hoped that would be the turning point, the moment where I became the central figure in James's life. But even on our wedding day, Lily found a way to make herself unforgettable. She arrived in a dress so glamorous it could have been mistaken for a wedding gown. As I stood at the altar, promising forever to the man I loved, I caught sight of her in the pews, tears streaming down her face. Guests murmured about how emotional she was, her grief almost overshadowing our joy. "She's just sentimental," James said later, brushing off my frustration. But I couldn't shake the image of her weeping, as though she were mourning something she'd lost. When our son, Noah, was born, James insisted Lily be his godmother. "Who else could it be?" he asked, as if the answer were obvious. I agreed, not wanting to seem petty, but it felt like another concession, another space in our lives that she claimed. She was there at every birthday, every holiday, her laughter filling the room and her presence taking up more space than it should. The milestones that should have been ours felt shared, diluted by her constant presence. I told myself I was overreacting, that this was just what friendship looked like. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was competing for my husband's attention, not with another woman in the traditional sense, but with a history and bond that excluded me. Each memory carried a shadow, a reminder that Lily was always there, and I was never truly alone with James in the moments that mattered most. From the moment I met James, Lily was a constant in his life, her presence weaving through ours like a thread that didn't belong. I often wonder how the milestones of our life together would have felt if they had been ours alone, untainted by her shadow. But from the very beginning, she was there, entwined in moments that should have been solely ours. I met James at a concert, his laughter rising above the music, his charm magnetic. But he wasn't alone. Lily was by his side, her energy spilling over as if they were the only two people in the room. I couldn't help but notice the ease between them, how she leaned into him, how her laughter lingered longer than it should have. "We're just childhood friends," he later explained, but something about the way she fit so seamlessly into his world unsettled me. Our first kiss was supposed to be a memory I'd treasure forever. We'd planned a quiet dinner, followed by a moonlit walk, a perfect evening for our first true romantic moment. But the evening unraveled when Lily called. She was at a bar, drunk and upset, and James felt obligated to go to her. I spent the rest of the night watching him console her, feeling like an outsider in what should have been my own romance. "She's like family," James had said, as if that excused the intrusion. I told myself to be understanding, to accept that Lily would always be part of his life, but the unease remained. When James proposed, I thought the dynamics would shift. Marriage, I believed, would establish clear boundaries. But even on our wedding day, Lily found a way to command attention. She arrived in a dazzling dress that outshone everyone else, including me. As I stood at the altar, my heart full of vows and love, I saw her in the pews, tears streaming down her face. Guests murmured about her emotional display, and her grief cast a shadow over our joy. James dismissed my frustration later, calling her tears sentimental. But they didn't feel sentimental to me. They felt like mourning for something she thought she'd lost. When Noah was born, James insisted that Lily be his godmother. "She's like family," he said again, the refrain that had become a mantra in our relationship. I reluctantly agreed, not wanting to seem petty or insecure. Yet, every time she stepped into our home, I felt like I was relinquishing another piece of my life to her. She was there at every birthday, every milestone, her laughter louder than anyone's, her presence taking up more space than it should. I tried to convince myself I was being unreasonable. Friendship, I told myself, often came with shared history and closeness. But as the years passed, the weight of her presence began to suffocate me. Every memory with James felt diluted, every milestone shared. It wasn't just about her being there, it was about how she always seemed to claim a central role in moments that should have been mine. I began to question whether I was truly a priority in James's life. Was I his partner, or just the woman sharing his life with someone else's ghost? My love for James was strong, but the cracks were growing, each one etched deeper by the moments that should have been ours alone but weren't. Lily wasn't just a friend. She was an unyielding reminder that my place in James's heart would always have to compete with the memories and presence of another. My birthday was supposed to be a special day, a rare moment of celebration amid the chaos of daily life. As evening fell, I heard James's car pull into the driveway, and a flicker of hope sparked in my chest. When he stepped through the door with a cake in his hands, my heart swelled. Finally, I thought, he remembered. "Happy birthday," I whispered to myself, already imagining the small, intimate celebration we'd have with our son. But as James set the cake down on the kitchen counter, his next words obliterated that fleeting moment of joy. "This is for Lily's birthday," he said casually, almost dismissively, as though it were the most natural thing in the world. I froze, the warmth in my chest replaced by a cold, hollow ache. "For Lily." The words escaped my lips before I could stop them, tinged with disbelief. "Yes, it's her birthday today too," he replied, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. She had a rough week, so I thought I'd surprise her. For years, I had swallowed my resentment, pushing it down into the depths of my soul to preserve the peace in our home. But at that moment, something inside me broke. The image of him walking into a bakery, picking out a cake with care, and doing so not for me, his wife, but for Lily, it was too much. "That's it," I said, my voice trembling. I can't do this anymore. James looked at me, confusion clouding his face. Can't do what? This, I snapped, gesturing between us. You, me, and her. It's never just been us, James. From the moment I met you, Lily's been there. She's more than just a friend to you, she's your priority. His expression shifted. Defensiveness creeping into his eyes. That's ridiculous. Lily is like family. No, I cut him off. Family doesn't intrude on every aspect of a marriage. Family doesn't overshadow the person you claim to love. Do you even realize how often you've put her above us? Above me. He scoffed, shaking his head. You're blowing this out of proportion. Am I? I demanded, my voice rising. Was it blowing things out of proportion when you left me alone to take Noah to the hospital because Lily needed you? Or when you canceled our family plans to take her out? Or today? When you brought a cake for her birthday and didn't even acknowledge mine? James's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The silence between us was deafening, filled with years of unspoken grievances finally breaking free. I've been patient, I continued, my voice cracking. I've tried to be understanding, but this is too much. Do you even care about how I feel? Of course, I care, he said. His tone exasperated. But Lily's been in my life forever. She's going through a tough time. And I'm not. I interrupted, tears streaming down my face. Do you even see me? James? Do you see how hard I've worked to hold this family together while you're busy being Lily's emotional crutch? His defenses faltered for a moment, but before he could respond, a sharp cry from Noah's room shattered the tension. We both froze, the sound pulling us out of our confrontation like a bucket of cold water. James ran a hand through his hair, looking toward the hallway. I'll check on him, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, all the fight drained out of me. I turned and walked away, leaving James standing in the kitchen with the cake that wasn't for me. As I cradled Noah in my arms, his small, warm body against mine, the weight of everything crashed down on me. This wasn't just about the cake or Lily. It was about years of feeling like a secondary character in my own marriage. About the constant compromises that left me empty. I wanted to scream, to cry, to tell James everything I had buried for so long. But in that moment, all I could do was hold my son and wonder if things would ever change. When I returned to the kitchen, James was gone. The cake sat untouched on the counter, a bitter reminder of everything that had just transpired. For the first time, I questioned whether our marriage could withstand this growing divide. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I even wanted it to. That night, as I sat in the dimly lit nursery holding Noah against my chest, my thoughts churned like a storm. His soft breaths, rhythmic and calming, were the only anchor keeping me from being swept away entirely. I kissed his forehead, feeling a pang of guilt for the turmoil he might one day understand. My marriage had become a fragile structure built on sacrifices I was no longer willing to make, and tonight's confrontation had illuminated what I had long refused to see. For years, I told myself that Lily was harmless, a fixture from James's past who, while intrusive, was ultimately inconsequential. I convinced myself that James's connection with her didn't threaten us. That his loyalty to her didn't diminish his love for me. But the truth was glaring now, undeniable in its clarity. I had always been second to Lily. Not just tonight, not just with the cake, but in every moment that should have belonged to us as a family. My efforts to hold us together, to preserve some semblance of harmony for Noah's sake, had only delayed the inevitable. I reflected on the milestones of our life together, so many of which were intertwined with Lily's presence. The first time we met, their shared laughter. Our first kiss, interrupted by her drama. Even our wedding day, overshadowed by her tears and the whispers of guests wondering about her feelings. And now, my own birthday was eclipsed by her celebration. These weren't coincidences. They were a pattern, a reminder of my place in James's life. A distant second. Noah stirred in my arms, his small hand gripping my shirt. He was my reason for enduring as long as I had. My justification for every moment I bit back my frustration and stayed silent. But what kind of example was I setting for him? What kind of life was I offering if I allowed him to grow up watching his mother accept being treated as an afterthought? I wanted more for him. And I realized I wanted more for myself too. When I finally laid Noah back in his crib, my decision crystallized. The weight of it was suffocating, yet strangely liberating. I walked to the bedroom. My footsteps quiet on the hardwood floor. James's side of the bed was untouched, his absence glaring. I imagined him at Lily's party, laughing, celebrating, carrying the cake meant for her. For a moment, I felt a flicker of anger, but it was quickly replaced by resolve. This wasn't just about the cake. It was about the years I had spent diminishing myself to fit into a role that never truly existed in his life. I opened the closet, pulling out a small suitcase. My hands moved mechanically, packing essentials for Noah and myself. With each item I placed inside, I felt the finality of my decision sink deeper into my chest. I left my wedding ring on the nightstand, a quiet declaration of an end I hadn't fully articulated aloud. As I glanced around the room, I realized that what I was leaving behind was not a home but a collection of compromises and unmet expectations. Before I walked out, I paused at the dining table, where a card sat untouched. It was the one I had written for James's birthday earlier that year, a simple note expressing my gratitude and love. He had forgotten it, much like he had forgotten so many things about me. I flipped the card over and wrote a single sentence on the back: "I hope you find what you've been searching for." With Noah asleep in his car seat and the suitcase in the trunk, I drove into the night, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and freedom. The road stretched ahead, illuminated by the soft glow of the headlights, leading me into an uncertain future. I didn't know where I was going, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was heading toward something instead of away from it. As I left, I allowed myself one final thought of James. Perhaps he would come home to find the empty house and my message, and perhaps he would feel regret. But even if he didn't, I knew I had made the right choice. It wasn't about punishment or revenge, it was about reclaiming my sense of self, about refusing to let Noah grow up thinking love meant sacrifice without reciprocation. In the rearview mirror, I saw the house shrink into the distance, and with it, the life I had clung to for so long. The tears I hadn't allowed myself to shed finally came, but they weren't just tears of sorrow. They were tears of release, of hope, and of the beginning of something new. That night, with the house cloaked in a heavy silence, I moved with quiet determination. The decision had been made. And now all that remained was to follow through. As Noah slept soundly in his crib, his tiny chest rising and falling in rhythm, I began to pack. The room, which once held so many hopes and dreams, now felt suffocating, its walls heavy with unspoken resentment and the weight of years spent living in someone else's shadow. I opened the closet and pulled out a suitcase, the familiar sound of the zipper breaking the stillness. My hands worked methodically, folding Noah's small clothes and placing them inside. His favorite blanket, the one with the dinosaurs, was tucked gently into a corner. I hesitated over the family photos on the dresser. The smiling faces frozen in moments that now felt like a cruel joke. I left them behind, they belonged to a life that was no longer mine. As I moved to pack my own belongings, the enormity of the moment began to settle in. This wasn't just leaving a house, it was leaving a life I had poured my heart into. Each item I placed into the suitcase felt like a piece of the person I had been, the woman who believed she could hold a fractured relationship together through sheer willpower. The woman who had stayed silent, sacrificing her own happiness, for the sake of her son and the men she loved. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone who understood that survival sometimes meant walking away. I paused by the dining table, where the remnants of the day remained. The birthday card I had written for James sat unopened beside a pile of unopened mail. It was a stark reminder of the disregard that had become commonplace in our relationship. I flipped the card over and wrote a single sentence on its back: "I hope you find what you couldn't with me." It wasn't meant to be vindictive. It was an acknowledgement of the truth that had been staring me in the face for years. In the nursery, I leaned over Noah's crib and brushed a soft kiss against his forehead. He was my anchor, my reason for staying as long as I had and my reason for finally leaving. I couldn't let him grow up in a home where his mother's worth was constantly diminished, where love was one-sided and sacrifices went unnoticed. He deserved to see strength, to understand that love should never come at the cost of one's identity. The house was eerily quiet as I carried the suitcase to the front door. I paused for a moment, taking in the familiar surroundings. This had been the setting of so many firsts, our first night as a married couple. Noah's first steps, countless holidays filled with laughter and love. But it was also the backdrop for heartbreak, the nights I spent crying alone, the moments I felt invisible. The house held too many contradictions to feel like a home anymore. Before I stepped outside, I left a note for James on the kitchen counter. It was brief, unemotional, a reflection of the emptiness I felt. I've taken Noah. I'll contact you about the divorce. As I started the car and drove into the night, the house grew smaller in the rearview mirror until it disappeared altogether. I expected to feel relief. But what settled over me instead was a mix of sadness and resolve. This wasn't how I had envisioned my life, but I knew it was the right choice. Staying would have meant losing myself entirely. And I owed it to both Noah and myself to reclaim what was left. The road stretched ahead, an open path leading to an uncertain future. I didn't know where I was going, but for the first time in years, I felt a sense of control. My heart ached for what was ending, the life I had fought so hard to build, the men I had once believed would always stand by me. But I also felt something I hadn't expected: freedom. Leaving wasn't just an act of self-preservation, it was an act of love, for myself and for Noah. It was a promise that I would never again settle for being second, that I would show him what it meant to choose happiness over compromise. As the city lights faded into the horizon, I allowed myself a single tear, not of regret, but of release. The chapter was over, but the story wasn't finished.